Hey everybody, it's Ryan with stampcollectors.us. It's been a while since I've shared some graded certificates with you guys, so I thought I'd do it again. Today I have my latest submission to PSE for stamp grading. If you aren't sure what stamp grading is or how to do it, check out this video that I did that explains it all. I'll put a link in the description. This is a smaller than normal submission with only 12 items. Usually I submit a group when I have about 20 items or more. But sometimes I'd rather get them submitted sooner than later because it could take around 45 days for it to process. To look up the graded values, I'm using the PSE website, gradingmatters.com. These values are also known as SMQ values, which stands for Stamp Market Quarterly, and are recognized by most United States stamp collectors, dealers, and auction houses. And as always, these stamps will become available for sale in my Facebook group, US Stamp Shop, where I post 75 premium US stamps for sale every week. Just search for US Stamp Shop on Facebook to join. I'll also put a link in the description. All right, let's check out the first stamp. The first stamp we got back is a Scott number 4. Now, this stamp looks almost the same as a Scott number 2, but there are some slight differences. The Scott Stamp Catalog can show you what those slight differences are. And it was issued without gum, which is what this NGAI is referring to. No gum as issued. And this one is graded a 80, which is very fine. It has 4 clear, ample margins on all sides and is sound. So let's see how much this stamp is worth in a grade of 80. All I'm going to do is go over to the Grading Matters website and put in Scott number 4. This little drop down here are just some of the previous Scott numbers that I've looked up. Let's go ahead and put in number 4. Now at a grade of 80, this has an SMQ value of $1,400. I mentioned this in some other videos, but I usually end up getting about 80% of the SMQ value for graded stamps. And the reason why I get 80% and not 100 is because buyers typically take into consideration the auction fees when buying a stamp. So if a stamp has an SMQ value of $100, they're more likely to offer 80 for it, knowing that they're going to pay about a 20% fee on top of that. Now that's just a general percentage. I've had some graded items go above the SMQ value and some that go for below 80%. It just depends on what the issue is and what a buyer's willing to pay. So that is a nice looking stamp there. All right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, next up we have a Scott number 10. So this is the orange brown color of the 3-cent 1851 design. This one came back in a grade of very fine, 80 and used. Now, this stamp to me is better than very fine for this particular issue. This looks to me to be more of an extremely fine example in terms of centering. However, the certificate notes that there is a small corner crease causing a tiny laminated thin at the bottom right. I don't know if that is within the stamp design or not. If it's outside of the design, that might be why this particular stamp still was graded an 80, because if you were to trim off the damaged part of the stamp, you'd be left with a very fine example in sound condition for these imperforate issue stamps. So the number 10 is a type 1. That means that it doesn't have an additional frame line on the inside of it, on the left and right side. So this is a type 1 in the orange brown color, making it a Scott number 10. Let's check out the SMQ value. So entering in number 10 in used condition here at a grade of 80 is a $200 SMQ. This stamp is still worth about $200, even though it has some small damage to it. Like I said, it could be because it's an imperforate, and if you were to remove that piece of the damage, it would still be a very fine stamp. Or it just might be that the fault is so small that it just got knocked down a grade from a grade of 90 to a grade of 80. Now, the way the SMQ value system is set up, if you have a graded stamp that has some faults, that means you can expect to get somewhere near the $200 for this stamp because it looks so nice with the large margins on it, but because it has a tiny fault on it, it should still go for about $200. Now, in this case, I would probably ask less than the 80% of $200 just because it has a little damage on it, and collectors and investors who like to collect graded stamps generally want them to be completely sound. But still, a very nice looking pretty stamp here with a minimal flaw at the bottom right, and is going to look very nice in someone's collection. All right, next up we have a Scott 367. Now, this is not the blue paper issue of this design, Scott 369. This is the 367 printed on normal stamp paper. I submitted this one because it just looked very well centered, it was never hinged, and from what I can tell, it appeared to be sound. So this one came back in a grade of 90, which is extremely fine, never hinged, and sound. Let's take a look at the SMQ value on this one. 367. So at a grade of 90 in never hinged condition, this stamp has an SMQ value of $45. Now, this stamp certificate cost around $25 to $30 to get, so the fact that it's only worth $45 doesn't leave a whole lot of room for making any money on this one. I usually will consider this to be more of a wash. It helps pay for some of the expenses in submitting the stamps, also the shipping involved with submitting stamps. So this is one where it's not going to make a lot of money, but it is still a nice, extremely fine sound stamp that's going to look great in someone's album, especially somebody who's collecting more well-centered and sound stamps in their album. Okay, the next stamp we have is a Scott 404. This is the perforated 10 issue of the Pan Pacific set. So this one was very well centered, and I submitted it hoping it was going to get hopefully at least a 90, but it came back as an 85, which is very fine to extremely fine. The stamps in this series usually are pretty difficult to get very good centering on, especially the Perf 10 issues. Just the printing methods back then were not as good, and they're usually found with not so great centering. So the fact that this one had very well balanced and even margins on it is the reason why that I sent it in for grading. Even though we didn't get the 90, this one still came in at an 85. Let's take a look to see what the SMQ value is for the 404. In used condition at a grade of 85, it has a $120 SMQ value. If it got a 90 like I was hoping, that would have went all the way up to $200. And if you had a mint example in the same condition and centering, you could be talking about thousands of dollars. So this one's going to be nice for somebody who likes to collect only used stamps but wants them to be well centered and sound. So next up we have this 427, which is the perforate 10 with a single line watermark issue. Now this one I thought was going to get graded fairly high, not just because of how well centered it is, but you have this very nicely struck, what we call sock on the nose, circular date cancel. And this one says San Francisco. It has a June date on it of 1916, making this period usage. And if you look at the cancel on this, it is just about the width of the stamp. So very hard to get it completely on the stamp without it going off the sides onto the envelope on which it was mailed with. And this one received a grade of 90 in used condition and sound. I was hoping it was going to get better than a grade of 90 because of how nice the cancel looks on it. A nicely struck cancel or a fancy cancel could add a premium value in grading. However, this time I don't think they did. Maybe the cancel wasn't strong enough to be awarded a higher grade, even though it's nicely struck on there. It is a little hard to see, like you can't see the June date very well on it. So it's not a perfectly struck cancel, but it's nicely struck and it does give it some good eye appeal. Even without the cancel, I thought this stamp was just so well balanced, and jumbo margins, it doesn't have a J designation either, which is disappointing. So this must have just been right on the cusp of being designated a jumbo design, and it must have been very close to getting an upgrade from the cancel on it. Very nice stamp. This is one where these Washington Franklin issues are pretty popular. If you have sound, well-centered examples, they can go far above catalog price. They can go all the way up to SMQ and beyond just because of their popularity. Let's take a look at the value of it in a grade of 90. Now in a grade of 90 used, this only has a value of $40. I'm probably going to ask $40 for this stamp just because of how nice it looks. I think it's a bit better than a 90, at least a 95 in my opinion. And with that nicely struck cancel on it, I think just add some additional eye appeal. It'll be a nice standout piece in someone's album. So I'm minimally going to ask $40 more than likely for this one. If it got a grade of 95, it goes all the way up to 110. So more than doubles its price just going up one more grade. And that's kind of where I was hoping this one would land at. Above and beyond that, it can go all the way up to $900 if it was graded a 100. All right, very pretty stamp. Let's take a look at the next one. Okay, so next up we have a Scott 501. This is a pretty common stamp, not worth very much money in ungraded condition without a graded certificate. This one came back as a superb 98, so just a grade shy of a perfect 100. It's also never hinged and in sound condition. So this is a very nice choice stamp, even though it's common. If you're looking to get near perfection, especially on this set, Scott 498 to Scott 518, these stamps in this set by default are not worth a whole lot. Most collectors can eventually obtain it for fairly cheap money, the entire set. But if you're one of those collectors who is looking to have the whole set in extremely fine choice or better centering and condition, here's a great example of the 501. Let's take a look to see what this one is worth in a grade of 98 on the SMQ. So a 501 never hinged in a grade of 98 puts this stamp at $500. Like I said, that's just crazy, because if you had this stamp in just very fine condition, it would be worth a couple dollars. And the fact that this is really near perfect, almost perfect centering on this stamp makes it worth $500. And I think that's just so exciting when you come across stamps like this that most people pass up, or it's overlooked because it's a common stamp and they are just so well centered. It's just a near perfect example of this stamp. For it to go all the way up into the hundreds of dollars of value is just really neat and exciting. And if you are the kind of person who likes to treasure hunt or find things that have value in them and invest in those things, then again, stamp collecting could be for you if you haven't tried it already. Or if you are a collector, maybe getting into stamp grading would be something that would interest you. All right, nice looking stamp. Let's take a look at the next one. Okay, next up, this one is a special stamp. Now, I did not submit this one for grading. It's not well centered, but I did submit it because it's an odd variety. This one is the Scott number 610, but what we have here is an imperforate pair. That means that it went through the press and it did not get perforated between these two stamps. So you have this unpunched area between the stamps, making this stamp an error. And it's actually noted in the Scott catalog as Scott number 610A. And 610A is listed as a pair, which this is, and it has a catalog value of $2,000. Now, the cert mentions that it is a horizontal pair, imperf in between and at the right. So these were both imperforate margins here. But the left side was trimmed down at the left. So I don't know if that makes it considered damaged or not, but it is noted on the cert, so that will probably affect the value. But it's still pretty rare to come across a genuine imperforate pair like this. And you can just tell how rare it is by the catalog value being $2,000 for this one. Pretty neat stamp. So I'm pretty excited that this came back as being a genuine imperforate pair. Next up, we have a Scott number 619, and this one came back in a grade of 85, which is very fine to extremely fine, and it's also never hinged in sound. This is another one where I was hoping that it would be graded higher than what it came back as. I think this stamp is probably closer to a 90 in my opinion, but with a grade of 85, let's take a look at the value. At a grade of 85, this stamp is only valued at $35 on the SMQ. And like I said, these certificates cost between $25 to $30, so that doesn't leave really any room for profit after you consider transaction fees, auction fees, shipping, handling. The stamp basically is a break-even stamp, unfortunately. But it will still make a nice addition to somebody's collection who's looking for very well-centered sound stamps. I actually have an example of this stamp that's graded 100 in my personal collection. And if we look at the SMQ on that one, it has a value of $625. All right, let's take a look at the next stamp. Okay, the next one we have is another one that I submitted not to get a grade, but just to get authenticated with this submission. And I was hoping that this was going to be a 634A, which is in the Carmen Lake shade. I noticed this one was a lot darker than normal, so I sent it in, and that's what that Carmen Lake color is. It's more of a purplish, deep, dark Carmen. This one came back as not meeting the criteria for that, and it was just noted as being a Scott 634 and in a dark Carmen shade. So not the 634A, which if it was, this would be a $500 stamp in used condition. But it came back as being just a regular Scott 634, a little darker than normal. But because of that, that makes this stamp basically worthless. It has no value at all. The money was lost on getting the certificate to check it out. And sometimes you just have to decide whether or not you want to take a gamble like that. Are you willing to pay the $20, $30 for a certificate, knowing that if it does come back as authentic, it could be a $500 stamp? So not so good news on this one, but I'll keep this as a reference. I like to keep the stamps I get back that don't end up being certified as what I submitted them for, because it gives me a reference to look at and compare future stamps with when I think I might have one of them. Okay, next up we have the 10-cent issue of the Washington Bicentennial set. This is a Scott number 715. This one came back as being extremely fine to superb, a grade of 95, never hinged and sound. You can see how well balanced the margins are on this one. Let's go ahead and take a look at the SMQ value for the 715. So 715 in a grade of 95 has an SMQ value of $40. Again, not a lot of money to be made on this one, unfortunately, at the grade of 95. I was hoping this would be a bit higher, maybe like a 98. So in this case, you go from a value of $40 at a grade of 95, and it quadruples to a value of $160 at a grade of 98. Unfortunately, this one just did not get graded high enough to make any significant money on it, but it's still an attractive stamp. Okay, and next up we have a Zeppelin stamp. This is the C14, the $1.30 Graf Zeppelin. And this one came back graded a 98J. So this one received a jumbo margin designation, meaning that the margins are larger than normal for this issue. And that generally happened when the sheets were running through the press. The sheets of paper would get wet, and sometimes they would stretch or retract, causing different sized margins around the stamp. So finding a well-centered example with larger than normal margins definitely adds a lot of value to a stamp, especially a popular issue like the Graf Zeppelins. Now let's take a look to see what this C14 is on the SMQ at a grade of 98J. This one is previously hinged, not never hinged. That means that it has had a hinge on it in the past, which has a separate value for never hinged. And so we're looking at the OGP here. If your stamp is hinged, not previously hinged, that means the hinge remnant is still on the stamp. You would still use the OGPH on the SMQ value guide to determine the value of the stamp. In this case, it is a previously hinged example, and at a grade of 98J, it puts this stamp at $1,100. Normally a previously hinged C14 like this, in very fine condition, I may get around $300 for. But in this case, being that it is almost perfect centering and with those larger than normal jumbo margins, it takes the value from $300 all the way up to $1,100. This is our last and final stamp that we have here. Here we have a duck permit stamp. This is RW39. This is from 1972, and this one was graded a 95, never hinged. Now, 1972 would be considered modern for stamps. I usually don't send in anything, past 1940 to get graded. In this case, though, with the duck permit stamps, some of the more modern issues, if graded superb or better, can be worth quite a bit more money. In this case, this one got a 95. So let's take a look at the RW39 in a grade of 95. So here you can see that makes this stamp worth $120. If this stamp was very fine and not graded, you might be able to get face value, maybe double face value for this particular issue. But the fact that it's graded a 95 now makes this stamp worth $120. I was hoping it was going to get better than a 95 because if you look at the value going up to 98, it's 180. And if you got a perfect 100 score on this stamp, it makes it worth $450, which is crazy considering that it's about a $5 to $10 stamp in very fine condition. All right, and that does it for this group. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please be sure to give it a like, and make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already and want to see more videos like this. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, best of luck and happy collecting.